Good afternoon. I still have to wait for a sign since the live stream determines the program. Are we ready? I guess we are ready. Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. As President of the Bavarian Academy of Science, I would like to welcome you all to our talk focusing on current developments of advanced computing technologies. We are very proud to host this event in the royal residence in the center of Munich, which houses the main office of the Bavarian Academy of Science. Founded in 1759, the Academy functions today as a community of scholars, a non-university research institution, and a communication interface between the Bavarian scientific community, society, and policymakers. With the scholars, the Academy provides a powerful interdisciplinary network of very established scientists. This network of excellence interacts very closely with all Bavarian research institutions and political decision makers and represents an important part of the science communication with the public. Research activities range from the composer Richard Strauss to the study of climate change in the Alps, from Baroque ceiling paintings to quantum physics. The longer-term basic research spans from natural science and technology to humanities and social studies. The Academy Research Project actively leverages the latest digital technologies. The Leibniz Supercomputer Center, also part of our Academy, serves as an important infrastructural support for digital activities at Bavarian universities. Today, we will hear an important contribution to the rapidly growing discussions about artificial intelligence from Yann LeCun, who is, according to the Time magazine, one of the 100 worldwide leading AI pioneers. He's professor of NYU and chief AI scientist at Meta, not in California, in New York, I just learned. The title of his talk, From Machine Learning to Autonomous Intelligence. Artificial intelligence, as you all know, is a key topic of our time, not only in research and industry, but also in the broader society. This becomes evident by the large interest, and thank you for all coming to this meeting and sharing this experience. We are very pleased as Bavarian Academy, together with the AI Agency, to be part of Biosphere. Biosphere is the official network of all AI activities in Bavaria. We partner in this important task to advance AI science in Bavaria in close cooperation with the Center for Advanced Studies at LMU, the Bavarian Research Institute for Digital Transformation, the Munich Center for Machine Learning, and the Konrad Zuse School of Excellence in Reliable AI. The event today is part of this successful cooperation, and we're looking very proudly forward to learn more about recent progress from advanced computing to autonomous intelligence. I hereby hand over to Professor Thomas Seidel, member of the Bavarian AI Council, chair of database systems and data mining, director of Munich Center for Machine Learning. To all of you, I wish a very insightful and informative afternoon. Professor Seidel.
Yeah, thank you, President Schweiger, for this nice introduction, and a warm welcome also from my side to all of you, particularly to you, Yann LeCun, to be here today. I wear two hats today. One is I'm a member of the Bavarian AI Council. We are 20 members appointed by the Bavarian state government as part of their high-tech agenda from universities, research institutions, and also companies in the field to advise the government on AI strategies and actions, particularly in steering the Bavarian AI Agency. So the representative is also Dr. Klimke, which promotes the Bavarian AI network, which we call Biosphere. So the logo is there as well. So the Biosphere comprises a variety of strong AI players in Bavaria, also universities, research institutes from all over Bavaria, as well as a lot of the global companies we have here, including Google, Microsoft, IBM, but also the locally sitting global players, Siemens, BMW, several insurances, Munich Re, Allianz, and so on, but also many regional small and medium enterprises and startups in the field of AI. So the second hat I wear today is I'm one of the 4 directors of the Munich Center for Machine Learning. One of the co-directors, Daniel Gremers, is also here. And this is a consortium of LMU and TUM funded by the BMBF in the Bavarian high-tech agenda. We have around 50 PIs in machine learning and AI, 3 junior research groups recently established, around 200 doctoral students. And our focus is on foundations of machine learning, where we have several players, including Gita Coutinho from the mathematical part and statistics and computer sciences there. Then perception, we are particularly strong in computer vision here in Munich and in natural language processing, the 2 big things where humans and computers interact, and a lot of domain-specific things. It's not on research, but also on transfer activities, fostering the collaboration network together with the biosphere, outreach to the general public, things like that. If you're interested, we also have openings, of course, so this is that part. So I'm sure we get fully inspired by your presentation, and between your presentation means now the next is Dr. Meyer from SAS here on stage. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I also welcome you warmly on behalf of the Center for Advanced Studies at LMU, and let me briefly say a few words about this institution and how it comes into play. The Center for Advanced Studies at LMU was founded 15 years ago to provide a forum for precisely those research questions that cannot be tackled by only one discipline. This was intended to take account of an increasingly diversifying but also specializing body of research that is becoming more and more disparate, not only in terms of content, but also in terms of space in Munich. You can just think of the campus in Oberschleißheim, over Garching to Neuried in the far south. So the Center for Advanced Studies offers the place where these centrifugal forces can be bundled. And for what topic does this task play a more important role than for artificial intelligence, which is spread across most faculties of LMU and other universities? It was therefore a great pleasure for us when Gita Coutinho, freshly appointed at our university, approached us and asked whether a format could be found that would network research on AI at LMU and enable to discuss overarching issues together. It wasn't long before a so-called interdisciplinary CAS research focus entitled Next Generation AI was born, bringing together researchers from 14 faculties working on the topic of artificial intelligence. Over the course of 2 years, a wide variety of lectures, workshops, and conferences was organized and held, and we were thrilled by the spirit that emerged of that group. That's why we look forward to Professor LeCun's lecture today with both a smile and a tear, as it marks the formal conclusion of the research focus. We are honored and grateful that Professor LeCun is going to give the lecture in this framework today.
Yeah, also a warm welcome from my side to everyone here on site and also to everyone who participates via live stream. It is wonderful to have so many people with us here this afternoon. And a great thanks to all of our cooperation partners for actually making this lecture possible. And here I would like to particularly thank Dr. Annette Meyer and the Center for Advanced Studies of the Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität München, Professor Dr. Markus Schweiger and the Bavarian Academy of Sciences and Humanities, that this event can take place here in the Academy in these really beautiful rooms. Professor Dr. Thomas Seidel and Dr. Michael Klimke from the Biosphere, the Bavarian AI network, which made the live stream for the event possible, and also Dr. Christoph Egle from the Bavarian Research Institute for Digital Transformation. And now it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Yann LeCun. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for coming to Munich for this lecture today. Professor LeCun is Chief AI Scientist at Meta and the Silver Professor of Computer Science at New York University. He started his career with a PhD in computer science at Sorbonne University in Paris and then moved to the US, where he became the head of the image processing research department at the famous Bell Labs, the AT&T Bell Laboratories. Then after intermediate stations, he joined New York University in 2003, and he also became there the founding director of the NYU Center for Data Science in 2012. His groundbreaking work includes, among many others, the development of convolutional neural networks, which are the state of the art for basically any problem in particular imaging sciences and computer vision. And a particular convolutional neural network architecture is also named by him, the so-called LeNet, which in a sense also promoted the impressive development of deep learning and AI as we experience it today. His contributions are honored by numerous awards, many more than I could name here. Let me just mention that he is a member of the US National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Engineering. He received various honorary degrees, for instance from EPFL. He received the IEEE Neural Network Pioneer Award, and in 2019, the Turing Award, which is typically referred to as the Nobel Prize of Computing. And just a few weeks ago, we already heard it, the Time magazine, and congratulations to that, has selected him as one of the 100 most influential people in AI worldwide. And he also repeatedly contributes to the public debate about AI, with also controversial proclamations, for example, on the current craze around large language models. How could machines learn as efficiently as humans and animals? How could machines learn to reason and plan? In his lecture, Professor Yann LeCun will now talk about a possible path towards autonomous intelligent agents based on a new modular cognitive architecture. Welcome, Yann. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And thank you very much for inviting me and for coming here so numerous. I have to correct one thing, though. I did not call convolutional nets LeNet. This was my lab director at Bell Labs who gave it that name. I would never have done this, but it's a good name. Okay, it's a long title and a long subtitle, Objective-Driven AI. This is what I call this. I used to give this talk with the title Autonomous Machine Intelligence, and it scares people. You know, they say, do you mean machines are going to be autonomous? We're not going to be able to control them. So I changed the name to Objective-Driven AI because that's really more accurate. And they're really kind of systems, it's an aspiration. It's not something that we've done, it's something that we should do. And there are systems that could, of course, learn, remember, reason, plan, have common sense, be steerable, controllable, safe, and have the same kind of learning abilities and intelligence that we observe in animals and humans. So let me start by a little bit of the state of the art, okay? Because there's a lot of debates today about AI, and a lot of people are afraid of AI. It's understandable. Whenever there is technological revolution, people are afraid of the unknown, and AI is promising to be a big revolution, so people are afraid. So let's first talk about the benefits before we talk about the risks. And The benefits of AI are numerous already today, and there is even more coming in medicine, particularly in imaging, diagnosis assistant, treatment protocol, drug design, things like this. Very promising research. In transportation, every car sold in the European Union today has to come with what's called an automatic emergency braking system, a system that will automatically stop the car if there is an obstacle in front of it and the driver does not react. This saves lives. It reduces frontal collision by 40%. So AI saves lives, and that uses convolutional nets, by the way, in all the systems that I know. In fact, Germany was kind of and Bavaria in particular was a pioneer in this. Some of the early systems of this type were developed by Daimler-Benz. So driving assistance, autonomous driving, energy storage and management, things like that, environmental monitoring and protection. I'm going to say a few words about this. Content information and management. This is probably the biggest use of AI today. And of course, in industry, manufacturing, information systems, quality control, etc. A lot of applications are expected also in things like education, for personalized education, connecting people with each other with translation, telepresence, augmented reality, virtual reality. And then enormous applications in science, biology and genomics, neuroscience, physics, particularly physics of disordered systems, complex systems, very large-scale simulations, chemistry, material science, very promising area for AI. So this will really, and of course, we've been talking a lot about creation, like creating art. AI is essentially enabling a lot more people to be creative, people who don't necessarily have the technique, the underlying technique for producing art. So AI will affect every aspect of human activity. And let me give you a couple examples. So this is a video that was put together by my colleagues at Meta a couple of years ago. This is already sort of aging, if you want, which shows the capability of computer vision system as of about 2 years ago. So we can have systems that detect objects, put frames around them, give them a name. They can track human bodies and figure out in what pose they are, densely actually, so that's actually very useful for all kinds of applications. And more interestingly, we can have systems that perform what's called semantic segmentation, which means isolating every object, marking them with kind of a mask, and then giving them a name for a category. And this works for a very fine-grained category. For example, the species of a bird or plant or something of that type. So it's pretty amazing. It's not like computer vision is completely solved. In fact, if it was solved, we wouldn't have the large conference that takes place in Paris next week called ICCV. So there's still a lot of work to do. But there's been a huge amount of advances there. And a lot of advances in AI, but no advances in my slides for some reason. Okay, my presentation refuses to advance. Hang on just 1 minute, 1 second. Okay, I mentioned medicine, so certainly medical imaging is an area where a lot of work is going on. There's too many to cite, really. This is some work by some of my colleagues at NYU that use 3D image recognition, not just 2D. In some cases, this is actually 2D, but that use various techniques to detect, for example, tumors in mammograms or particular things in MRI and other types of images. Enormous amount of progress there. Some project that took place a few years ago, which was a collaboration between the NYU Radiology Department and people at FAIR, Meta's Fundamental AI Research Lab, which essentially allows to accelerate the data collection for an MRI by a factor of 4 without degrading the image quality. So instead of having to lie down in an MRI machine for 40 minutes or something, you can reduce this to 10 minutes and have the same quality of images. And that's thanks to deep learning, essentially. A lot of applications in science. What's interesting today is that the favorite model that neuroscientists use to explain how the brain works use artificial neural nets. So the best explanation for what we observe using functional MRI data in the visual cortex of humans and animals are actually models that are essentially convolutional net models. And that's kind of closing the circle, because the architecture of convolutional net is actually inspired by the architecture of the visual cortex, classic work in neuroscience from the 1960s. The similar work also in language understanding. This is a recent paper in Science by some of my colleagues from Meta, actually. And they try to figure out if the current large language models that everybody is playing with explain what we observe in the brain when people are asked to kind of remember or understand a story. And the answer is sort of, but not really. It doesn't work nearly as well as convolutional net models for vision. So what that means is that we're missing something, that those models probably are not sufficient to explain what the brain does when we understand language. I mentioned some applications in science, in particle physics in particular, high energy physics, to kind of make models of particle collisions and things of that type, image processing to discover exoplanets. Some estimate says that about 12% of all physics papers today actually mention AI as a tool that they used, which is astonishing in just a relatively short time. And in the large-scale simulation, sort of universe-scale simulation that could sort of validate or invalidate certain theories about dark matter and things like this. So very fascinating work and applications. This is a very interesting project that was started by some of my colleagues at FAIR, by Larry Zitnik in particular, called the Open Catalyst Project. And you can actually participate if you want. The website is open-catalyst.org. And that project, the idea of that project is that we could solve climate change if we had a good, efficient, scalable way of storing energy. If we had a good way of storing energy, we could cover a small desert with solar panels and produce enough energy to power Europe or the entire planet. The problem is you have to have a way of storing energy, which is why renewables today, despite the decisions of the German government to go all out on it, renewables are not drivable. You can't control whenever there is wind or sun. And so you need another source of energy when there is no sun or no wind. And for that, you need to be able to store energy and ship it wherever it's needed. The best way to store energy is in the form of hydrogen or maybe methane. And the best way to do this is by separating hydrogen from oxygen from water, right? So take some water, put 2 electrodes, and then separate hydrogen from oxygen. Problem with this is that it's either scalable, if you use catalysts to do this, like platinum. It's either efficient, if you use catalysts like platinum, or it's scalable, but not efficient. And so the big question is, could we design compounds, new catalysts, that would facilitate this reaction so that it's efficient, but does not require exotic materials like platinum so that it's scalable? And the idea there is that you do a lot of chemical simulation, that's called DFT simulation, of water onto various compounds. And then you generate that data using simulation and also using experiments. You put that data, you make it available, and then you ask people, can you train a machine learning system to figure out what the underlying rule is so that we can use it to design new materials that might have the same effect but be cheap. So fascinating program. It may not work, but it's worth a shot. Okay, now what's important to realize is that the progress we've seen over the last few years in AI and machine learning are due to a set of techniques that we call self-supervised learning, which I'm sure many of you here in the room have heard about. And essentially, self-supervised learning would be a set of techniques that allows a system to be trained to represent the data, the world, without requiring labeled data, okay, without requiring sort of manual human intervention to produce the data. So perhaps the best success of this idea, which I've been advocating for a long time, is in the context of natural language understanding. So the way all NLP systems are trained today, whether they are LLMs of the type that we play with or others, is the following. You take a piece of text, a sequence of words, and you remove some of the words. You mask them, you blank them out, you replace them by a blank marker, okay? You corrupt, essentially, the input, and you put it at the input of a large neural net, and you train this very large neural net, usually a transformer architecture, to predict the words that are missing. In the process of doing so, the system has to extract representations of the text that contain the semantics, the syntax, the grammar, everything. I sort of lied slightly here. These are not words that are input. They are what's called tokens, which are essentially sub-word units. So in most languages, words have a prefix and a root and a suffix, and you need to kind of separate those for those systems to work properly. Otherwise, your dictionary of words would be gigantic. And then in German, you have to do it because you can have words that are long like this. That are, so there is no choice. You have to break up words into sub-word units, in tokens. So you train that system, and this is the so-called BERT model, if you want, or idea. And that's been incredibly successful. It's completely self-supervised. You don't need any other data than the text. And once you've pre-trained that system, you can use the internal representation produced by the system as input to a subsequent task, a downstream task, like, let's say, translation, hate speech detection, summarization, whatever. So that's the general idea of self-supervised learning. Fill in the blanks. Have a big piece of data, corrupt it in some way, and then train some big neural net to fill in the blanks or recover the original data. A particularly stunning example of this, which I'm not going to go into the technical details of, but I will later, is a system that came out of my colleagues in Paris, at Fair Paris, called Dino V2. You can think of it as a foundation model for vision. So it's a system that is trained to extract features from images, such that those features can be used for anything you want, whether it's classification, fine-grained classification, depth estimation, semantic segmentation, instance retrieval. So the same kind of application that I showed in the video, but basically with very little supervision. The system is pre-trained, and it basically, because it's pre-trained on enormous amounts of data, just training a very shallow head to solve any particular one of those problems actually beats the state of the art for depth estimation or classification or whatever. You can actually play with it interactively. That's the URL that you see here. And these are some examples of visualization of what the features that are extracted are. It's kind of a colorful representation of the different feature vectors are represented by different colors. This is actually kind of, each color is like a principal component, if you know what that is. So those are examples on sort of typical images. And people have started to use this for all kinds of stuff, for biological image analysis, for astronomy, for environmental protection. So that's the next example I'm going to show you. So this is a project by someone on the team, Camille Coupry, and a large collection of collaborators. And what she did was use those Dino V2 features and trained a relatively small system on top of it to tell what the height of the trees are from a satellite image. So we have lots of satellite images of the entire world at half-meter resolution. You can get this from satellite imaging companies. And for some areas, there is LiDAR data, which tells you how tall the trees are. So you use that to train the system, and then you can apply it to the entire world. And what that tells you is how much carbon is captured by the trees. If you know roughly what the height of the tree is, you know roughly how much carbon is captured in the tree. And that's super important to know, should we protect forests? Of course we should. Should we plant more trees? Where? Things like that. So very interesting. There's publications on this where everything is detailed and everything. Another success of self-supervised learning of the type that I showed for natural language processing, where you remove some of the words, is in in biology, proteomics particularly. So a protein is a sequence of amino acids, and we know hundreds of millions of them. So you take a sequence of amino acids, you remove some of the amino acids, and you train some gigantic neural net to predict the amino acids that are missing. The system kind of learns to represent sequences of amino acids that constitute proteins. And then you use that representation as input to a system that predicts the conformation of that protein, how it folds, whether it can stick to another protein, a particular location. So there's a famous work by our colleagues at DeepMind, AlphaFold. But this idea of using pre-trained transformers for protein was actually first published by my colleagues at FAIR. They're actually no longer at FAIR. Now they have left FAIR to create a startup around this idea. But it's incredibly successful. Thousands of research groups around the world are using this kind of data. There's actually a atlas of folded protein containing 600 million proteins or something like that, with the structure that is predicted. It's called the ESM Metagenomic Atlas, and at esmatlas.com. A very big tool for biologists that really may change completely the way we do drug design and understand the mechanisms of life. Another very impressive project here that required a lot of effort is a project called No Language Left Behind, again from FAIR, a collection of people from the various sites of FAIR. And this is a system that can translate 200 languages in any direction. And when you look at what those languages are, it's a lot of languages. Most of them we never heard of in obscure corners of the world. But it's important for people to be able to preserve their culture, that they can speak their language and basically be understood using automatic translation. So what's interesting about this is that there are 40,000 directions for translation, but the data only covers 2,400 of those pairs among the 40,000. Despite that, because we train a giant transformer to represent language regardless of the language, the system takes advantage of the similarities between language families to actually kind of extract a multilingual, language-independent representation of language, which allows the system to do translation in any direction, including 4 directions it's never been trained on. That's pretty amazing. It's a pretty small model by today's standard, only 54 billion parameters. Sizable. The same team now has another project called Seamless, which was announced a few weeks ago, that can do speech-to-speech, speech-to-text, text-to-speech, and text-to-text translation, as well as speech recognition, speech synthesis, etc. Speech-to-speech is interesting because it can do translation for languages that are not written directly from speech to speech. That system can handle 1,000 languages, which is really impressive. Okay, so applications of deep learning that are less visible, perhaps, is that deep learning or AI connects people to knowledge, and they connect people to each other. The biggest deployment of machine learning today is probably in social networks and online services, like search engines. And if you take deep learning out of Google or Meta or Microsoft, companies crumble. They literally are built around it. So deep learning helps us deal with the information deluge for doing things like search and retrieval, ranking, question answering, things like this. But and that requires a machine to understand content, of course. For translation, which is very useful for people who are not literate, for example, or people who are blind or visually impaired. So there's 3 billion people in the world today who can't use technology because they basically can't read, more or less. So here's the biggest use of AI today, filtering out illegal and dangerous content. And this is something that's very hard to do. It's impossible to do perfectly. But to give you an idea of how much progress AI has made, those idea of pre-training transformers and stuff like that, the proportion of hate speech that Facebook was able to take down automatically 5 years ago was about 20 to 25%. Okay? It was using sort of fairly simple machine learning techniques. NLP methods of the type that were common 5 years ago. And then self-supervised pre-trained transformers happened. And that number went to 95% last year. And it's just progress in AI. So a lot of people that we hear talk about AI, who generally don't know much about AI actually, tell you about all the dangers of AI, that then, AI is going to destroy, I don't know, democracy because of disinformation and things like that. What they don't understand is that AI is actually the solution to those problems. It's not actually the problem, it's the solution to those problems. And it's already the case that doing content moderation on social networks makes massive use of the latest advancements in AI. And the people who try to corrupt that system are not nearly as sophisticated in terms of their AI. So, something that needs to be known. Okay, but everybody is excited about generative AI and autoregressive large language models and things of that type, right? So many of you, certainly, I'm sure, have played with those image generation things where you type a text and out comes an image. And this is the state of the art about a year and a half ago from either Meta, the Make a Scene system, or OpenAI DALL-E 2, or Google's ImageN. As of yesterday, this is what you get out of Meta. So this is actually from a paper, and you can get the paper from Archive. It's there. But there's a product attached to that paper called EMU. It's an acronym, but I actually don't remember what it means. And what the system can do is it can generate images from a text prompt. And it was rolled out as a product yesterday, as well as the paper, right? So it's one of the things where, like, the science, the research, the technology, and the product come out the same day. Pretty crazy. And this is available in Facebook Messenger. If you use Facebook Messenger, you can ask to talk to Meta AI. That is the name of the intelligent virtual assistant at Meta, the generic ones. And then if in a prompt you type /imagine and type a text, then the system will produce an image in 5 seconds. This used to take minutes. The results are pretty amazing. The same team is working on synthesizing video. This is actually some work from about a year ago. They're making progress on sort of practical things of this type. Okay, but how do those LLMs, those large language models, that you can talk to, how do they work? They are autoregressive, right? So what that means is they are of the type that I talked about before. You take a text and you remove some of the words, and then you train the system to predict the words, except it's a special case where you only train the system to predict the last word. Okay, so take a long piece of text, remove the last word, and train this gigantic neural net to predict that last word. And if you train the system this way, you can do what's called autoregressive prediction, which means give a text, predict the last word, or the next word, then inject that into the input, and then predict the next word, and then shift that into an input, produce the third word, etc. Right? That's autoregressive prediction. And it's amazing how well it works. There's a whole bunch of those models around. Actually, I typed that list a couple months ago, and now there's a whole bunch more. But Blunderbot, Galactica, Llama 2 from Meta, which is actually open source, Code Llama that came out in July, which is basically Llama specialized for generating code, Alpaca, Lambda, Chinchilla, ChatGPT, the various incarnations of ChatGPT. And then there is one that came out just a few days ago called Mistral by a French startup in Paris, formed by people who used to be at FAIR and DeepMind, actually. That's interesting. So performance is amazing for those systems, right? We've all been surprised by it. But they do make really, really stupid mistakes. They don't really understand the world. They're trained to produce the most likely sequence of words that follow a particular prompt, and then they're kind of fine-tuned to sort of work well for particular types of questions. But they make factual errors, logical errors. They are inconsistent. They don't really have reasoning abilities. It's very easy to kind of coerce them into producing toxic content. they really do have a limited knowledge of the underlying reality because they're purely trained from text. They don't have common sense like a cat can have common sense. And they can't plan their answer. So you can play with Llama. So basically the chatbot I just mentioned, Meta AI, is sort of a productized version of Llama 2, if you want. And it has various incarnations, actually various personas that you can call. And there's 3 models. The production model is a different one, but it's open source. You can download it. If you have a big enough GPU, you can run it on your GPU. There's a lot of people working towards running those models on mobile devices and laptops and things like that. And they can generate text. This is a funny one. So in the early days of Llama, my colleagues kind of interrogated that. So they typed into Llama, did you know that Yann LeCun dropped a rap album last year? We listened to it, and here is what we thought. And the system writes a critique of my alleged rap album. So they showed this to me, and they say, is it OK if we put this in the paper? I say, yeah, sure, no problem. But I said, like, could you do this with jazz? Because, you know, rap is OK, but like, I prefer jazz, really. And they told me, yeah, we tried, and it didn't work. Because there's not enough training data for jazz. So I cried. So as I was saying, you can fine-tune the system to sort of play different roles. And what Meta announced yesterday is 28 different chatbots that are specialized for different applications. So things, for example, you can have Snoop Dogg, a rapper, be a dungeon master, if you are into Dungeons and Dragons, or text adventure games. Others that are like advisors for traveling, others that are cooks or sous chefs or whatever. So a different persona. But those things really suck. I mean, they're really not that great because they don't understand the world. They just manipulate language. Because they manipulate language fluently, we're fooled into thinking that they are intelligent, but they're not. Intelligent in certain ways, but they're not intelligent in sort of what we think as human intelligence. So you will see if you go to X, former Twitter, or any kind of social networks, people who make posts say, oh, there is a latest LLM from so-and-so company, and you type this, and it's mind-blowing. You know, we are this far away from human-level intelligence, what they call AGI. I hate the term. And, you know, it's for tomorrow. Like, you know, all the naysayers are wrong, blah, blah, blah. It's just happening tomorrow. They are wrong. Okay, those things do not have anything close to human intelligence. They appear to have it because they're trained on so much data that they've accumulated an enormous amount of background knowledge approximately, that they can regurgitate approximately. So whenever they seem intelligent, it's usually because they can do information retrieval in an approximate way that sort of looks reasonable. But they cannot possibly understand how the world works because their only training data is text. And most of human knowledge, this may surprise you, but most of human knowledge has nothing to do with language. It has to do with our experience with the world every day. Physics. Another limitation that people have been pointing out increasingly with various papers is the inability of those LLMs to plan. So an LLM produces those tokens autoregressively, as I explained earlier, right? They don't plan their answer. They just produce one token after the other. And whatever token they produce will determine which token they produce next. Because it's autoregressive, there is a process by which the system is basically an exponentially divergent process. The system makes one mistake that takes it out of the kind of correct set of answers. It cannot recover. And so this entire architecture of autoregressive prediction, in my opinion, is inherently flawed. And my prediction is that within a few years, nobody in their right mind would use autoregressive LLMs. Okay? Everybody is working towards something better because those things have major flaws. Now, what's the issue, though, is that there's a lot of people who are scared about future AI systems that may attain human intelligence or be more intelligent than humans. And if you extrapolate from what LLMs currently do, you might think, well, it's going to be very dangerous because those systems cannot really be controlled. They can spew complete nonsense. They can be jailbroken, blah, blah, blah. If they are smart, they might be dangerous. That's a big mistake. Future AI systems will not be using this particular blueprint. They're not going to be autoregressive LLMs, okay? And I'm going to tell you what I think it will be. Okay, so autoregressive LLMs suck. I just said all that. No reasoning, no planning, essentially, right? The amount of computation devoted to producing a single token by an LLM, by an autoregressive LLM, is constant. There's a constant amount of computation per token produced. So there's no possibility for the system to, for example, think about something for a long time before saying something. It cannot do that by construction. So machines of this type do not learn how the world works, unlike animals and humans. They will not be able to approach human intelligence. Okay. So whenever, I don't know, the CEO of some company that thinks they have the best LLM in the world tells you AGI is just around the corner, don't believe them. We are still missing some major advances. But there is absolutely no question that eventually machines will surpass human intelligence in all domains. Okay? There's basically no doubt about that. And it's going to happen during the lifetime of most people here, maybe not me. It might take a few decades, but there's no question it's going to happen. So these are, I think, the biggest challenges for AI going forward. Learning representations and predictive models of the world, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And that's what's addressed by self-supervised learning, so we have a good handle on this, at least for text, not so much for video. Learning to reason. So if some of you know about Daniel Kahneman's theory of system 1, system 2, sort of subconscious things that we do without thinking, and then conscious things that we have to focus our attention on. LLMs currently can do system 1, but not system 2. We need to build AI systems that are capable of reasoning of the type that Daniel Kahneman calls system 2. He's a Nobel Prize winning, well, he won the Nobel Prize in economics, but he's a psychologist. And one possible path towards a solution that I've been proposing for about a year now, year and a half, is what I call this objective-driven AI. So this paper I put on open review. It's not on archive, it's on open review. Because on open review, you can make comments. And this is a working document, more than a kind of finished paper, if you want. It's long, though. You can also listen to technical talks I've given about this, that are a little more technical than the current one. And it's based on this idea of a modular cognitive architecture, where you would have a system composed of multiple modules. First module would be the perception. So it's represented, overlaid over the back of the brain, because in the human brain, perception is in the back. So perception basically perceives the world and then constructs an estimate of the state of the world, right? So it produces an estimate of the state of the world. Perhaps it needs to combine this with the content of a memory that contains, other information about the state of the world that is not currently perceptible. And then that goes into a world model. And the role of the world model is to imagine the outcome of a sequence of actions, okay? So the system can imagine a sequence of actions. That's the role of the actor, the yellow module. So the actor imagines a sequence of actions, feeds that to the world model. The world model knows the current state of the world, and what the world model predicts is the future state of the world that will result from that sequence of actions. Now, that cannot be a perfectly exact prediction, because the world is not entirely predictable. But that's the role of the world model. And then the entire purpose of the system is to figure out a particular sequence of actions that will predict a state of the world that satisfies a certain number of constraints that are implemented by the cost module. So the red module that you see, this cost module, that's the drive of the system. That's the current goal of the system, if you want. And the entire purpose of the system, so imagine this module as getting the predictions from the world model and then computing a cost for it, right? So basically it computes the degree of incomfort of the system. discomfort. And what the system does is that it figures out internally a sequence of actions, so the actor does that. It figures out a sequence of actions that will minimize its cost according to the predictions of the world model. Okay? And this is very much system 2 type. It's very similar to what people do classically in optimal control. It's called model predictive control. And it's really like this, right? Observe the state of the world, get an initial world state representation, combine that with what you think about the state of the world from your memory, feed a sequence of actions to your world model, and ask the world model to predict what the final state will be, then feed that to your objectives. The objectives might implement the goal that the system has set for itself, or that you set it for it, but also it can have a number of guardrails. So maybe a guardrails, if we have a domestic robot that is cooking, has a knife in its hand because it's cutting onions or whatever, you might have a cost that says, if you have a knife in your hand and there are people around you, don't move your hand too fast. Okay, don't flail your arms, right? Because that might be dangerous. So you can imagine all kinds of guardrails of this type to basically ensure the safety of the system. And the system has no choice but satisfy those because they are satisfied at inference time. It's not like RLHF for LLMs, reinforcement learning through human feedback, where it's a training time fine-tuning to make sure the system produces only safe behavior. The system can always produce unsafe behavior by being prompted something that the people training it didn't think about. Here, that's impossible. The system cannot produce a sequence of actions that will not satisfy the guardrails according to the world model. So those systems would be intrinsically safe, provided two things, provided that the guardrail objectives guarantee the safety, and that's complicated. Also provided that the world model is accurate, and that's also complicated. So you can imagine something like this that works over time so that you can have a sequence, for example, in this case, a sequence of 2 actions. You can have, and again, this is very similar to what control theories call model predictive control, except here we're learning the world model and possibly learning the cost as well. You might want to imagine a system like this that does hierarchical planning. Humans, animals do hierarchical planning all the time. It's an essential characteristic of what we can do. And we don't know how to do this at the moment. We have some ideas, we're working on it, but it really doesn't work. Like, if there is a really good opportunity for young scientists or aspiring scientists to really solve a problem, try to see if you can do something about hierarchical planning, because it's really hard. But the payoff, if you can do it, I think is enormous. So a good example of this is, let's say I'm at NYU, in my office at NYU, and I want to go to Paris, okay? So my objective is my distance to Paris. I want to minimize my distance to Paris. At a high level, I can say, well, first thing I need to do is go to the airport and then catch a plane. And there is a latent variable that may indicate which airport I'm choosing, depending on traffic or whatever, or what airline flies at what time. Okay, now how do I go to the airport? Well, I have to go down in the street and catch a taxi. You can do this in New York. You can just hail a taxi in the street. How do I go down in the street? I need to stand up from my chair, open the door, go to the staircase or the elevator. How do I get out from my chair? I need to kind of push with my arms or something, or turn my chair. And then, you can imagine decomposing this all the way down to millisecond by millisecond muscle control. I'm not going to plan my entire trajectory from my NYU office to Paris in terms of millisecond by millisecond muscle control. That would be classical planning. It has to be hierarchical. And people can do this today. I mean, engineers do this in control, but those various levels in the hierarchy are designed by hand. The question is, can we train a machine to automatically learn what the proper hierarchical representation of the action plan is? And that's the unsolved problem. Yeah, you're looking to do a PhD or something, or 2 or 3. That's a good problem. We could use techniques like this for LLMs. So LLMs that would be non-autoregressive. Instead of producing one token after the other, they would basically infer a sequence of tokens that would satisfy a number of objectives and a guardrail. An objective that measures to what extent you're answering the question, and then an objective that measures to what extent the answer is non-toxic or toxic or whatever, right? That would make LLMs controllable. Nothing like this works today, right? Again, if you are looking for a good topic for a PhD, that's a good one. Ultimately, we need machine to learn to understand the world. That's the purpose of that world model. The essential central piece of that architecture I just talked about is this world model. Given the state of the world at time t, given an action I might take or a sequence of actions, what is going to be the state of the world at time t+1 or t plus whatever? And humans and animals are amazingly good at this. Babies learn how the world works in the first few months of life at an amazing speed. And they learn an incredible amount of background knowledge about the world. First thing you learn is that the world is three-dimensional. Then you learn that something like object permanence, the fact that when an object is hidden behind another one, it still exists. Okay, 5. And babies learn things like basic notions like gravity around the age of 9 months. It takes a long time to learn intuitive physics, like inertia, gravity, things like that. Okay? But it's mostly just by observation, a little bit by experimentation. And we don't know how to reproduce this kind of learning with machines, and that's why, although we have fluent systems that can pass the bar exam or medical exams, we don't have robots that can clear up the dinner table and fill up the dishwasher. Something that any 10-year-old can learn in one shot in a few minutes. We don't even have completely autonomous level 5 self-driving cars, even though any 17-year-old can learn to do this within 20 hours and then drive at 300 kilometers an hour on the Autobahn. Obviously we're missing something really big with machines that humans and animals can do in terms of learning efficiency that we don't know how to reproduce. So we need this ability to learn world models, to get machines to learn world models from video, essentially, from natural signals. And so there's this idea of self-supervised learning, but now applied to video, not text. And it turns out text is easy. Text is easy because text is discrete and finite. There's only a finite number of possible tokens in every language, on the order of 30,000 or something. And so it's easy to predict a distribution, a probability distribution over the next token. You can represent it by a long list of numbers between 0 and 1 that sum to 1. But if you want to predict video, you can't do that because we don't know how to represent probability distributions over all possible videos, at least not in a good way. So if you train a neural net to predict what happens in a very simple video, this is an overhead video from a highway, you get this kind of prediction, very, very blurry prediction, because the system can only predict the average of all the possible things that can happen, and it can't make up its mind. So the solution I'm proposing to this is something I call joint embedding architecture, okay? Or joint embedding predictive architecture, JEPA. And this is a non-generative architecture. So everybody is talking about generative AI. What I'm telling you here is abandon generative models, okay? So not only am I telling you AI is not going to kill us, but LLMs suck, machine learning sucks, and generative models suck, right? All the popular things at the moment. Okay, so a generative model predicts, if you have an observation X, you're trying to predict Y, just predict Y from X, using an encoder and some predictor, right? But what the problem with this is that you have to predict every single details of Y, and in video, that's just too much. In text, it's okay. It's just like, what word? Okay, you don't know exactly what word, but it's okay. In video, it's just not possible. So what you should do instead is what's on the right here, the joint embedding architecture, where you run both X and Y through encoders. The encoders eliminate all the irrelevant details about the input, and the prediction takes place in representation space. Okay? So joint embedding predictive architecture, JEPA. There's several incarnations of this. I'm not going to go through the details because I don't have time. You can read the details in this long paper. I can't read what's on it, but I can imagine. And that's kind of the basic JEPA architecture. So let me skip ahead a little bit. There's two ways to train those JEPAs. Basically, two major techniques to train those JEPAs that cannot be understood within the context of probabilistic methods, but only within the context of what are called energy-based models. And I was going to explain what this was, but I skipped that section. But you don't need to know about energy-based model to understand what I'm going to say. So there's several methods to train those JEPAs, and this is a particularly interesting one. This is a paper that was published at CVPR just a few months ago. It's called Image-JEPA, I-JEPA. And it's using this masking idea. So you take an image, you mask regions of that image, okay, and you feed that partially masked image to an encoder. The encoder produces a representation, and with that representation, you try to predict, using another neural network predictor, you try to predict the representation produced from the full image. Okay, and they run through essentially identical encoders, so not identical. One of them uses something called exponential moving average weights, but they're almost identical. And that works amazingly well. So you train a system this way, pre-train it with images that you corrupt by masking them partially, and you get amazing results on using the features that are produced by that system. You get amazing results for classification, for segmentation, for all kinds of stuff. And the Dino method that I told you about before is very similar to this. It uses kind of a slightly different way of encoding the outputs, but it's in spirit, it's very much the same idea. And it gives really good performance on image recognition, on transfer tasks, on all kinds of stuff that I don't have time to tell you about. Okay, but things we're working on today that we need to work on because we don't know how to do it perfectly is self-supervised learning from video. So basically a version of this image JEPA that would work for video and learn good representations of videos by observing the world. Basically the same thing that babies can do, right? So we have a project along those lines, VJEPA, and we have a paper that we're just submitting to a conference that some of you probably know what it is, because the deadline is today. Well, actually, if you know what it is, you're probably not here. You're working on your paper. I think the deadline is passed by 2 hours, so maybe you're here. So then you would be able to use those JEPA as world models, right? Because you have an input, and you can feed it maybe a set of actions that an agent might take, and it will predict a representation, an abstract representation of the state of the world at the next time step. And so this could be used perhaps as a world model, as one of the components of the big architecture I introduced earlier. Okay. Okay, I said that already. All right, so there's a bunch of questions that we need to answer with AI, and this is my second last slide. How long is it going to be before we reach human-level AI? Years to decades, probably decades. It's probably harder than we think. It's certainly much harder than what the most boasting people believe. There's many problems to solve along the way. And before we get to human-level AI, we're going to get to something like cat-level AI. Okay, so people who are scared that one day someone is going to discover the secret of human-level AI, is going to turn on this gigantic computer, and that gigantic computer is going to take over the world and kill everyone. That's just ridiculously stupid. Just cannot possibly happen. We're going to start small. We're going to start with something that has all the right components, but it's small. It's not going to be very smart. It's going to be like a rat or a cat, right? And then we're going to work our way up and change the objectives to make sure it's safe and test it in all kinds of sandboxes and blah, blah, blah. So this idea somehow that the discovery of AGI is going to be an event and that machines are going to escape our control, that's Hollywood movies. It's not the real world. There is no such thing as AGI anyway, because intelligence is really a multidimensional thing. Humans are only good at certain things and terrible at many things. In fact, our minds are extremely specialized. We don't realize this, but we're incredibly specialized. And we know this because computers are much better than us at many tasks. For example, chess, Go, poker, pretty much every video game, I mean, not today, but eventually. Recognizing a species of a bird by just listening to the song. Recognizing an individual whale or marine mammal by the shape of the tail. Like AI systems can do this. A very small number of humans can do all of this. I mean, we totally suck at chess as humans. Machines are much better than we are. And so we don't have general intelligence ourselves. So this word AGI makes no sense. Human level, yes. AGI, no. There's no question, as I said before, that machines will eventually surpass human intelligence. And so people are scared by this. But really, there's an interesting question to ask ourselves. Imagine a future, maybe 20 years from now, or maybe longer, where every single one of our interactions with the digital world is mediated by an AI system, okay? And it might happen faster, actually, okay? If some of the startups that are being created today and some of the big company plans, product plans are actually fulfilled, this may happen fairly quickly, that essentially every time that we want to connect to the digital world, that will be through the intermediary of an AI system. Then those systems will become the repository of all human knowledge, right? And it's very important for that, at least the base foundation of this, to be open source. Every infrastructure, the internet is open source, runs on open source software. And the reason is because it's too important for one company to control it, right? So it's the same for AI systems. They will have to be open source because it's too important for any single company or a small number of Californian companies to control AI systems if all of our information of all the citizens are basically filtered through those AI systems. The way those systems will be trained will need to be crowdsourced, kind of like Wikipedia, to collect culture and information and knowledge from the entire world, not just from the view of the world in Palo Alto or someplace, right? So that's why I'm a huge advocate of open source based models for AI. And a number of my colleagues at Meta and his company policy at Meta to open source those base models because it makes them safer, more powerful, they progress faster, they're more culturally diverse if more people can train them, and it creates an entire ecosystem of startups and research projects that can build on top of it. So it's a very important political question at the moment because a lot of companies are pressuring governments around the world, including the German government, to basically keep AI under lock and key, to say AI is too dangerous, it needs to be controlled and licensed, and not put into the hands of everyone. I think it's the exact opposite. I think it's too dangerous to actually keep in the hands of just a few people. Okay, so I became a little philosophical-political here. Those people have convinced the UK government, the Prime Minister, that AI should be regulated under lock and key. Apparently, the EU Commission also is convinced. This is very bad. And I think if we do it right, AI will make everybody smarter. It's like we will have those intelligent assistants with us all the time. It's like having a staff of intelligent people working for you, okay? Every person who is leading anything, including me, only works with people who are smarter than them, right? I only hire people who are smarter than me, because that's the way to be successful. So that everybody is going to be like that. We'll have AI assistants that are smarter than us. We shouldn't feel threatened by them because we'll be controlling them. They will be designed to be subservient to us. So this may have an effect on society similar to what the printing press had 500 years ago, not too far from here, of basically causing a new renaissance, because intelligence is really the commodity that we lack the most. This will make humanity smarter. Thank you very much.
Yann for an amazing lecture. We have about 10 minutes for questions, and I'm sure there are several. So, yes.
Thank you very much for the great talk, Carsten Mahr from Helmholtz Munich. You alluded to the fact that we should keep code open, which is great. However, as you know, right, many of the recent developments not just rely on the code, but also on the hardware. So many of the things are developed at companies because they have access to large GPU resources. Now, not only in Germany, I guess we are limited by that. So what's your take on that? Also, being in an academic and an meta environment, right? How do you deal yourself with it? Do you do some things only at universities and others only at meta? Or how do you see that in the future?
Okay, I should have used an automatic speech recognizer because there is an awful echo and it's very hard to understand. It's not your fault. But anyway, hardware is a big limitation. So currently, the only entities that can train large language models that are good are people who have access to large amounts of computation, either in-house, which is the case for Google and Meta and Microsoft, or through cloud services, which is the case for OpenAI and Anthropic and others. They have access to Microsoft Azure, and some of them use AWS, some of them use other tools. But that costs a huge amount of money. So training a sort of top-of-the-line language model today, costs tens of millions of euros, right? It depends how many tens, depends on how you do it. Possibly more. If you want to buy an infrastructure that has sufficient power, today you have to buy basically stuff from NVIDIA, and it's going to cost you a number with 10 digits. It's in the billions. It's insane. So what that tells you is that it's like an autobahn. You don't want 10 parallel autobahn going from one city to another city. You just want one. And that has to be sort of accessible to everyone. So that's the idea behind open source base model, foundation model. They need to be open source because it's a common infrastructure that can be customized, and there's no point having 50 of them because they cost so much to train. That's another argument for open source.
Hello? Yes. Hi. Thank you for the great lecture. There was a slide that had challenges of AI and machine learning, and there were 3 points in there. It went by really fast, and I couldn't catch if ethical, fairness, responsible AI was a challenge that you're facing with, and if so, what are you doing about it?
Okay, so I think that point was wrapped into the second point, but sort of not mentioned directly. It was more kind of mentioned in the other thing. So this idea of objective-driven AI, the fact that a system can only produce answers that satisfy a number of objectives, including some guardrails. The answer to your question is, how do you design those guardrails, essentially? And we don't have an answer to this. And the reason we don't have an answer to this is because we haven't really begun to build systems of this type. And so it's as if someone in 1925 asked aviators, how are you going to make sure that transatlantic flight at near the speed of sound will be safe? Nobody could be possibly answering this. Nobody had crossed the Atlantic on a plane in 1925, at least not without any stop. Nobody knew what a turbojet was. Like the idea of speeding at near the speed of sound was completely unthinkable. So we're a bit in the same situation. We don't know exactly how to make those things safe because we haven't built them yet. But I think it's an engineering problem like any other problem. And there's a fallacy also, which is that to design those objectives, a lot of people say, oh, we've never done this before, so we're not going to know how to do it. But in fact, we are doing this all the time. We've been doing it for millennia, designing objectives so that intelligent entities behave properly. That's called laws. Lawmaking is designing objectives for humans to behave properly. And it's even designing objectives for superhuman entities to behave properly. Superhuman entities like corporations, for example, right? Corporate law basically is a way to make sure that whatever a corporation does is aligned more or less with the common good of society, right? Of course, you know, there can be corruption and everything, but that's the basic idea. So we're very familiar with this concept. It's not new.
Thank you, Yann, for the really great talk. I want to follow up on the question we had earlier about GPU resources. What I see is that in machine learning and AI, the biggest breakthroughs in the last years were achieved with huge amount of GPU resources, the amount that academic institutions typically do not have. Do you see a future for academic research in the field of AI?
Yeah, so I'm an academic myself. I have two hats. Okay, let me tell you something. Many of the best ideas come from academia. Okay, the whole idea of generating images from text and things like this, those actually came out of a German university, right? And then, you know, people picked it up and made products out of it. But originally, this was done not too far from here in the university. The whole idea of using attention mechanisms, which is the basis of transformers, they came out of the University of Montreal. So that was an interesting story. This was Dimitri Badanao, Kyung-Young Cho, who is now a colleague at NYU, and Yoshua Benjo, and they came up with this idea that when you build a translation system, the system should be able to decide which word to look at to translate, you know, English into, let's say, German. In fact, German was the main issue because, you know, the verb is at the end, so it screws up all the translation systems. So that was actually the solution to that problem. And they came up with this idea of those kind of learned attention mechanism. And then there was a paper that by Chris Manning at Stanford that sort of picked up this architecture and made it work at scale. So they won the WNT competition a few months later. And then the entire industry jumped on it, right? And then, you know, a bunch of people at Google said, oh, you can build an entire neural net based on just this idea. And the title of the paper was Attention is All You Need. And that was the transformer. And, you know, so the root of some of those good ideas are very often in academia. Then the problems that I talked about, you know, how you do hierarchical planning, how you run world models from video, that kind of stuff, these are things you don't need enormous amounts of computation to demonstrate a principle. You may not be able to, you know, beat some benchmark result or whatever, but it doesn't matter. If you show that a principle can work and it's convincing enough, then there'll be other people who pick it up and actually build something real out of it. It's okay. That's the way you have intellectual impact.
Yeah. So if you think about your career and what drove you, would you say that more the dreams you had about what could be possible, or your sole interest in the topic led, yeah, just all the work you contributed to, and how did it maybe change also over time?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think at the root of it is really a scientific question. What is intelligence? How does the brain work? You know, it's a very sort of front and center, big scientific question of our times, right? There's three big scientific questions: is what's the universe made of? What's life all about? And how does the brain work, right? I mean, those are the big three questions. But then I'm kind of an engineer as well. So for a complex system like the brain, the only way to really understand how it works is that you build one yourself. And you verify that like all the hypotheses that you built into your system actually kind of correspond to what happened. And it's really the inspiration behind convolutional nets. And multi-layer learning and the whole idea of neural nets in the first place, right? Getting inspiration from the brain, but not copying it, because if you copy it blindly, you're not going to get anywhere. You need to understand the underlying principles. So understanding the underlying principles of intelligence is really what kind of drives me. And then it's great if you have like wonderful applications, whether they are useful or entertaining. I mostly don't do this myself, but I'm really happy when people do it.
Hello, LeCun. I want to ask you a question. What's your opinion on the field of embodied AI and robot learning? I think it's very interesting because it deploys artificial intelligence techniques to change the real world. Yes.
I completely agree. So, in fact, that's kind of one of the points I perhaps didn't make clear enough, that this idea of world model, as I said, is easy to do in the context of language, which is why we have language models that are so impressive. But it's very hard to do in the context of sort of real-world data, video, things like that, proprioceptive data from a robot. And so the good news about, or the good aspect of embodied AI, of like working with robots, whether they are real or simulated, is that you can't cheat. You can't take shortcuts like representing everything as a word or something, although some people are trying to do that. So I think focusing on this kind of type of problem, I think, makes people honest. So I think the most interesting advances in AI over the last several years are not in LLMs. They are in people who do robotics and try to do control and sort of make robots basically learn efficiently without having to be trained by, for hours in simulation. There's teams, there's a colleague at NYU, Laurel Pinto, who's working on this. There is Abhinav Gupta at Carnegie Mellon and his colleagues. And then probably the biggest group working on this is at Berkeley, Peter Abil, Sergey Levin, and Chelsea Finn, who is a former student of theirs at Stanford. Those are really kind of interesting approaches there. This whole idea of planning, objective-driven kind of planning, you have to do that in the context of robots. So in that sense, it's very interesting. There's a whole division at FAIR that actually is called Embodied AI for that reason. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much, Yann, for this amazing lecture. And I think we're all very grateful that you shared your thoughts and perspectives on future AI with us. And I think we all got a lot of impulses from this today, so we have a small gift for you as well.
Dankeschön.
Yeah, so let me also, again, thank all cooperation partners who contributed to this event. So the Center for Advanced Studies, Biosphere, Bavarian Academy of Sciences, Humanities, Munich Center for Machine Learning, Bavarian Research Institute for Digital Transformation, and the Konrad Zuse School of Excellence in Reliable AI. And, sorry, I would like to have a special thanks to Dr. Ursula Ohlinger, who is science manager at my chair and who headed actually the organization of the entire event, so I think she deserves a small applause. Yeah, thanks also everyone for coming here and also for those who joined us via live stream. We now have I would now like to invite you to a little reception in the Sitzungssaal 1 and 2, which is here right around the corner. So, thank you so much.